Hello, Algebra 2 folks. We're describing key features of graphs today, so what we're going to need are our notes, pencil, foldable, and hopefully some other colors, whether they're markers or colored pencils. With that, let's get started. Our learning targets for today are threefold. I can determine where local maximums and minimums are on a graph. I can determine where a graph is increasing or decreasing and state the intervals at which they're increasing or decreasing. And I can find the x-intercepts and y-intercepts of the graph. So this is what your foldable should look like. It has four little flaps. If you're confused on how to construct it or build it, this would be the back side on the green lines. What yours are all black, but if you imagine those lines to be green, we fold there, and if you imagine those two little red lines to be red, that's where you would cut, and then on the blank side of the paper, right in here, that's where you would glue it into your notes, okay? Okay, now we're on the inside of the foldable. We're going to start in the top left-hand corner of the inside of this foldable, or on the flap that reads X and Y intercepts on the outside. So as we go along, notice the colors of what I'm writing in words and how that matches the graph or the parts of the graph and the colors on that picture. So the first fill in the blank that we want to fill in is the x-intercept is the point or points where the graph crosses the x-axis. So in this particular example, I have three x-intercepts, and they are the points -3, 0, 1, 0, and 5, 0. So notice how I'm keeping my vocabulary all the same color. So for x-intercepts, we're going to keep that color-coded purple, or if you're picking a different color, maybe keep it all the same, okay? So next we're going to talk about the y-intercept. The y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. And in this example, it's the point 0, 2. Intercepts are something that we should be familiar with, but if we're not, that's a quick recap. So if we keep moving on down the left side of the foldable, now we're going to be talking about intervals where our graph is increasing and decreasing. So a function is increasing on an interval if the y value increases as the x value increases. So we're looking at the graph where both of our values are increasing. In this example, we're increasing on that first bit. So when we read from left to right, we're starting on the y value at -infinity all the way going up to the value of the y value of 4. And then we are also having another increasing interval, and that starts at the y value of -4 and goes on for forever in the positive y direction and x direction, okay? A function is decreasing on an interval if the y value decreases as the x value decreases. So in this particular example, it's that in-between space of our increasing intervals. So increasing and decreasing are easy to notice by our eye because we read from left to right, but sometimes writing them down as a notation can be difficult, but we'll practice that in the next two examples. Okay, next flap. The maximum is the y value of the highest point in a particular region of the graph. So in this example, my maximum is -1, 4. So it's that green point, that high point, that's my maximum. The minimum is the y value of the lowest point in a particular region of the graph. And in this particular example, it's the point 3, -4. So that's my minimum, or where the graph is dipping. The maximum is where the graph is peaking, and the minimum is where the graph is dipping. Okay, the last little flap is talking about zeros, roots, solutions, and x-intercepts. Those words are all interchangeable, you guys. Zeros, roots, solutions, and x-intercepts are all the names that describe the x value of a graph whose corresponding y value is 0. So whenever I use the word zero, root, or solution, this is the same definition for all of them. They all go back to x-intercepts, so the x value when the corresponding y value is 0. So make sure we get all of those words inside of our foldable and that we've highlighted or color-coded our key features on our picture graph. We have two examples of these key features on graphs, and so this is our first funky special function. So we're going to start with the x-intercepts, and in our picture we have 4 spots where the graph is crossing the x-axis. It's this point, this point, this point, and this point. And those 4 points are -4, 0, -3, 0, 1/2, 0, and 3, 0. And then we want to talk about where it's crossing the y-axis, and that's at this point right here, and that point is 0, -2. Increasing and decreasing intervals. When we talk about increasing and decreasing, we want to look at the x values or our x-axis and reference that when we create those intervals, okay? So if we read the graph from left to right, we're going from the left, we're going from the bottom all the way up to this point right here, which is probably a -3.5. Oops, -3.5. And then we go down all the way to this point right here, which is about -1.5. And then we're going back up or increasing to this point, which is a value of 2 on the x-axis. And then from there, we're going down forever, okay? So we have two intervals that we're increasing. It's this part of the graph, right? And this part of the graph. So when we write those intervals, we use the numbers for the x values on those points. So my first interval is going to be -∞ to -3.5, and then my second interval is going to be -1.5 to 2. Remember, we use brackets for when it's included and then parentheses when it's not included. So we always use parentheses around the infinities, okay? And then my decreasing intervals are going to be the other intervals. So from here to here, which was -3.5 to -1.5 in brackets, and then from 2 to infinity, which is bracket parentheses, bracket 2 to infinity, okay? And then our maxes and mins, we always talk about the y value when we talk about those. We have two maxes. We have a max here and a max here, and those points are y is equal to 1 and y is equal to 5. And then my minimum is the point right here, which has a y value of -5.5. And then my domain of the whole entire graph is -∞ to +∞ in interval notation, and then my range is everywhere below this line. So we're saying, when we say range in interval notation, we're going from bottom to top, okay? So that's going to be -∞ all the way to 5. It doesn't go past 5. So that's the first example. Okay, example number 2. We have two x-intercepts, -1, 0, and 3, 0. That's where they're crossing the x-axis. And it's crossing the y-axis at the point 0, -3. Okay, our intervals that where we're increasing. So we're increasing from this point all the way to +∞. So that is bracket 1 to infinity. And then we're decreasing from left all the way down to that point, right? So my decreasing interval is going to be from -∞ to 1. Remember, on our increasing and decreasing intervals, you want to use the x values, or you want to reference the x-axis when we create those intervals. When we talk about maximums and minimums, we want to use the y values of the points that are maximums or minimums. So on this graph, since the arrows on the top are signifying to us that it's going to go on forever and ever and ever on the left and the right hand side of that U shape, we actually don't have any maximums, but we do have one minimum. That's that low point right here, and that y value is y is equal to -4. Our domain is going to be from -∞ to +∞, and our range is everywhere above this line. So from -4 to +∞ is my range. Remember, for our range, when we create that interval notation, we go from bottom to top, and with domain, we go from left to right. So I want to thank you all for taking such good notes, and I shall see you soon.